All right, we are on SSP contract training. Contract training. This is like everybody's like most asked questions when you get into a situation where you have multiple layers of properties. And I'll explain a little bit more for those of you who are brand new. So an SSP is a sale and settlement contract addendum that goes that rides basically onto the agreement of sale. You would use an SSP agreement if you have a buyer who already owns a property, but they have to sell that property before they buy their next one. Okay, so sometimes we have clients who already have a mortgage and then they want to usually upgrade their home. So they're buying their move up home. But unfortunately, they cannot buy another home until they satisfy the mortgage of their first home. And that's usually because of a couple different factors. This could be a debt to income ratio factor that the lender says, hey, we have to, this house has to be sold. It could be an underwriting factor. So maybe they have a house that they bought on a VA mortgage and they want to use another VA, or they want to do, they have an FHA loan, they want another FHA loan. So the other home has to be liquidated as part of the purchase of the next. It could be just a budgeting issue, even if they can get pre-approved for that second mortgage. Budget-minded individuals may not want to carry both mortgages at the same time. So really, what do we do as licensed professionals to help these buyers who want to move up into another house, but have to relinquish the house that they have? So a tactic that we use is your sale and settlement addendums, your sale and settlement negotiations. Now, sale and settlements is not always something that is easily used or easily constructed within a contract. A lot of times, if we're in a very hot market where we're experiencing multiple offers, things are going above ask, a lot of times the seller is not going to want to accept a sale and settlement agreement as part of the offer on their property. Because a sale and settlement agreement is never guaranteed and it delays the closing process. So depending on the type of market climate we're experiencing, you guys may be using the sale and settlement contracts a lot, or you may not be using them at all. So we just exited a market where it has been traditionally a very hot seller market. So we have not experienced sale and settlement contracts for quite some time. But now as the marketing is softened and it's becoming more balanced, where, homes are still selling at a good rate, but we're not seeing, 3, 4, 5, 15 multiple offers on a property within the first 48 hours, sale and settlement is making a comeback. So I wanted to make sure that we included this in our contract training so that all of you understand how you can utilize these to really help your clients. So one of the things that we find, though, with sale and settlement is there's lots of different ways you can do it, and there's lots of different forms available in your Zip Forms library. So it can get a little confusing. So I have pulled out the 4 forms that we typically use for sale and settlement, and then we're going to go over those today. And I'm going to give you a couple pinpoints or push points on them, so you can determine when you have one of these contracts, which is the best one to use. So we're going to start with the SSP, that is Sale and Settlement of Other Property Contingency Addendum to the Agreement of Sale, and that's available in your PAR forms. So if we open this up, this is going to be the one that you're going to encounter the most often. However, it is one of the addendums that is accepted the least often. Okay, so we're going to use it as buyer's agents the most often. It's going to be accepted the least number of times, okay, because this is very driven towards your buyer's protection, but leaves very little protection for the seller in terms of sale and settlement contracts, okay? So when we're doing an offer with our clients, we may start with this addendum as part of our offer, part of our ask, but this may not be the addendum that we land on. So here at the top, we have the information, property address, seller, buyer. Okay, that goes without saying. And then paragraph 1 is this agreement of sale is contingent upon the sale and settlement of buyer's property at. This is where you put in that buyer's address. So you could put in 123 Main Street, Pittsburgh, PA. Okay. And then you would put in a zip. This is not a real address, so I don't know what that zip is. All right. So we put that in. This is saying that your buyer owns this property and that this property is going to be sold before they can go forward on the agreement of sale with the seller. Paragraph 2 says when the property is going to be listed for sale. So it's important to tell your buyers that within 2 days, unless a day is specified otherwise, their property must be listed for sale on the MLS. Okay, so it needs to be listed on the open market. So it says right here, buyer's property is currently listed for sale or will be listed for sale within 2 days, if not specified, of seller's acceptance of this agreement under an exclusive right to sell agreement with a broker of buyer's choosing who is a member of the multiple listing service, most directly serving the area to which the buyer's property is located. Okay, so we have a lot of buyers who ask questions. This says, oh, I have it up for sale by owner. Not going to work. I have a sign in the yard. Not going to work. Not going to work. I have it listed with a brokerage who does not participate in the West Penn multiple listing service, which is the primary server for the Pittsburgh market. Not going to work. All right. So the easiest way to do this is to say, hey, in this agreement, you must list this home on the market within 2 days with me or, a brokerage that functions like my brokerage does. And that's kind of your in for saying, hey, let's go ahead and get this house on the market. Number 3, buyer's property is or will be listed at or below. This is where you put the listing price. So let's say in this particular property, they're going to list it for $250. You would put $250 right in here. And then you're going to put the term for ending right here. Okay, so this is your ending date for a term ending. And let's say we're going to do 60 days and we're going to put that in there. Okay. Number 4, this is where we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of things. If buyer receives a bona fide offer for the buyer's property, buyer will promptly notify the seller in writing and provide a copy of the agreement of sale for the buyer's property. So this is always a common question I get is when an agent goes under contract using an SSP of any form, and then the buyer's property goes under contract, usually the listing agent will respond to the buyer's agent and say, please send me a copy of the agreement of sale that you have on the buyer's property. And I usually get an email that says, well, isn't that breaching confidentiality? Why does this person want it? I shouldn't have to provide this information. And it doesn't, because both parties are agreeing here that you have the ability to release a copy of the agreement of sale. Now, you cannot release anything else. So you can't release anything outside of the agreement of sale on the agreement between your buyer, who is now your seller, that makes sense, the person who owns 123 Main Street, and their buyer. The only thing you can release is the agreement of sale. Okay. So when that occurs, you're going to put either a date in here, or if not, it's 2 days if specified. Considering that we use business days, so if you get an offer on a Friday, you would want to make sure that the listing agent on your, on the buyer's purchase is getting that by Monday or Tuesday at the latest. The seller has the right to either accept or reject the buyer's property offer. So why would a seller reject a buyer's property offer? I've seen a lot of crazy things, and this is just kind of put in for a fail-safe. We have seen instances where the buyer has gone under contract and it's kind of like a seller finance, or it's a wholesale, or it has some assignment clause, or it's got some kind of like rinky-dinky weird kind of thing in there, which makes the offer that they have accepted not very strong. So if that is the case, the seller does have the right to reject that offer to remove the SSP contingency. So we want to make sure, as we're representing our buyers and they're putting their houses on the market, something that's, tethered to the purchase of their new home, that we are really only putting them in a position where we're accepting offers that have a good likelihood of being able to close. So we want those offers to be as clean as possible. Let's see here. So within 24 hours if not specified of receiving written notice that the seller rejects the agreement of sale of the buyer's property, the buyer can provide written proof of buyer's financial ability to proceed without the sale and settlement of other property, or a copy of a renegotiated or new agreement for sale with acceptable terms. So again, this goes back to your buyer accepted an offer with a wholesaler. It has an assignment clause in it that says they're not the end buyer. They're going out to find a buyer. It's very messy. The seller is able to come back and say, hey, we don't want this assignment clause to be in there. We need to have a bona fide buyer. So either show us that you have the cash to close or renegotiate the contract and take that clause out. Down here is important, number 5. After blank, if buyer's property is not under agreement of sale with terms acceptable to the buyer, the seller may terminate this agreement by written notice to the buyer. So this is when you're going to put in your timeout clause. So this is when this clause is going to end. And we're going to say that we're going to keep this open for 30 days. So your buyers are notifying the seller that they will have their house under contract for sale within 30 days by 6/14/2026. And if they do not, then the seller has the right to be able to cancel the agreement of sale. At this point, you always have the availability to do a CTA to continue that if both parties agree to, continue it on for another couple weeks or another month. And I've seen that happen. So you just do a CTA to change that date in paragraph 5, and it can continue, indefinitely if that's something that both parties agree on. But usually we start off with a small window of time, like 30 days, and then we kind of play it from there. So again, this SSP is going to be the most common one that you will use, but it will not be the one that is often accepted. And here's why. For a seller, if a seller accepts the SSP, the seller must take the property off the market, which means it's going to go into contingent status on the MLS. So it is going to go contingent or under contract during that time period. That prohibits the seller from actively marketing the property. Okay, so the seller at this point cannot offer nor market the property to anybody else. So let's say, for example, the seller accepts this SSP from your client that they're going to sell their house at 123 Main Street, Pittsburgh. And they go under contract, they agree on the terms, and now they're locked in for 30 days. A week later, somebody just walks in off the street and says, hey, I'd love to offer you $20,000 more than your client's offer, and I have the cash, I'm ready to go now. The seller is not allowed to accept that offer because they are in a tight contract with sale and settlement with your client. So if your addendums ever get rejected by the listing agent, understand that they're not being, merry-meanie. They're just, doing the job to make sure that they're protecting their clients' interests. And you would need to know this if you represent sellers as well. If you get these documents, some of the positive and negative attributes of each one of these documents. Before we go on to the next one, does anybody have any questions on the SSP? No? All right, let's move on to another sale and settlement that you can use. And this one is the SSPCM. SSPCM, this is sale and settlement of other property contingency with right to continue marketing. So if you're a buyer's agent and you're putting in the traditional SSP form, a lot of times the listing agent is going to kick it back and say, we want an SSPCM. So this is the one that is accepted most of the time. Okay, so this is accepted most of the time. This allows more protection for the seller and less protection for the buyer. So this one probably has the least amount of protection to your buyer. So just know that going in. And depending on who you represent, you may love or hate this form. Okay, so at the top, we have property address, seller's name, buyer name. Same thing as the last form. The agreement of sale is contingent upon the sale and settlement of buyer's property. This is where you put in that property address. 123 Main Street, Pittsburgh, PA Perfect. Now let's look at some differences between the SSP and the SSPCM. So number 2, right from the bat, buyer acknowledges that seller has the right to continue to offer seller's property for sale to other prospective buyers. That is the ticket. That is the ticket. Paragraph 2 and 3 is going to be the ticket to this form. So this means that when your buyers put in an offer for an SSPCM that says, okay, we're going to negotiate the terms up front, we're going to sign the contract, we have to sell this property at 123 Main Street. But during that time, the listing can remain active on the MLS. You can continue showing the property, and you can also accept other offers on the property. Okay, so that's the biggest thing. This is the only form that you can use that allows you to keep the property active on the MLS. This is the only one. Okay, and a lot of times you'll get messages from the West Penn Multi-List that will say, don't forget to send us your form. This is the form that they're looking for, the SSPCM. Paragraph 3, in the event seller accepts an agreement of sale for seller's property from another buyer, this agreement is terminated. And you see how this agreement is terminated in bold? The seller does not have to ask permission from the buyer to terminate the agreement. They can terminate the agreement at any time if they have another offer on the property. Seller will immediately notify buyer in writing of termination, and deposit monies paid in the account of purchase price will be returned to the buyers. So this is one of those forms where, again, it's very seller protected, but it's not very buyer protected. But it is a form that is accepted more times than the traditional SSP is. Okay. This is the timeout clause here. So when is it timing out? 30 days. And that's it. I mean, really, that is it. Unless, it will automatically time out 614. Again, it can be extended with the CTA. But again, this is the only form you can use or that you can accept as a listing agent where the home remains active on the market. If you accept an SSP or if you accept any of the other addendums that we're going over, the home needs to be marked as contingent in the multi-list. Also, there are other steps in which you have to follow. If the seller wants to accept another offer on the home, the buyers have to be given kind of the first right of refusal. In this case, they do not. They do not have to be given any right. The seller just has to get another offer, sign that offer, and then the buyer's offer is terminated. Any questions with the SSPCM? No, you guys are quiet. Quiet today. All right, next one is an SSP-TKO. And we do see this one get accepted more than the traditional SSP. So the SSP-TKO is the sale and settlement of other property contingency with right to continue marketing in a timed knockout clause, addendum to the agreement of sale. Okay. Now, I know it says right to continue marketing, but I can tell you that a lot of times the MLS will reject this SSP form and they will want this contingent. Okay. I don't know why. It does have right to continue marketing, but the language in here, I think, is the determining factor of why they want the CM and not the TKO. So we'll go over that in a minute. Okay, so same thing, property seller buyer. You have your property address here. They're going to be listed for sale within 2 days. It goes listed price, term ending on the listing contract. All right. Buyer acknowledges that seller has the right to continue to offer seller's property for sale. So it doesn't say that the seller has the right to continue marketing. It says that the seller has the right to continue to offer. It's always very confusing with the West Penn on how they're interpreting that, but considering that, we do have to follow their rules, make sure that you are getting a CM if you want to continue marketing the property for sale, because the TKO, and I've done this myself, I have accepted a TKO and then had to put the house contingent because that form was not accepted by the West Penn as a continuing to market form. All right, just so that everybody's aware. And like the, I had dug into that prior, and they were saying, hey, it can be contingent, and you can continue to show it. and receive offers, but it cannot be active. If a buyer receives a bona fide offer, so this goes over the same terms as the SSP, they can accept it, they can reject it. The seller has 24 hours. The buyer has 24 hours to satisfy the seller's rejections or make changes to it. Again, there is the timeout clause here, which we've been putting in for 30 days. So we'll put that in. And then here we are in paragraph 7. So this is where it starts to get a little different. If seller receives a bona fide offer from a different prospective buyer with terms acceptable to seller, seller will promptly notify buyer in writing of seller's receipt of acceptable offer and seller's intent to terminate the agreement. Within 24 hours of receiving written notice that seller has received another bona fide offer, the buyer will do one of the two things. They will provide a buyer's written proof of financial ability. So basically, hey, don't worry, we found the cash under a mattress somewhere. We've got enough cash to close. Or they will give a copy of an agreement of sale on the property that they are trying to sell. So this is giving them the 24 right of refusal. So this is giving them the first opportunity to move forward, which is why it's called a timed kick out clause. So if the seller accepts another property, the buyers basically have 24 hours to say, yes, we're moving forward, or unfortunately, no, we cannot. So if the buyers cannot move forward, then the seller has the right to terminate their agreement and move forward with the other party. Okay. So again, SSP is very rarely accepted. SSP, CM is more often accepted. SSP, TKO, more often accepted. Just understand with the TKO, that the home has to be contingent during that period and that the West Penn Multiple Listing Service will not accept it. Okay. Questions on the TKO clause? No? All right. Last but not least, we have an SOP. So an SOP is different than an SSP because there is no sale, there is only settlement. So you would use this addendum when you have a buyer who has already listed their property for sale. The property is already under contract with a buyer, and they just need to wait for settlement. So this is forms that we use when we're going to do back-to-back closings. And if you've never done a back-to-back closing, let me tell you what, it's like a 3-ring circus sometimes. But back-to-back closing just means that you have a buyer who's buying a property with you. They're also a seller and selling their property. So let's say in a perfect world, it's Friday and you have the property that they are selling scheduled for closing at 9 a.m. And then the property that they are going to be buying is scheduled for 1 p.m. So you're doing it back to back. So you're doing the sale in the morning, you're doing the purchase in the afternoon. And that's kind of how we stack those in a perfect world. But this addendum protects your buyer in the event for any reason that the contract that they have with their buyers falls through. And we all know as real estate professionals, a lot of things can happen. We have lots of contingencies. You never count your chickens till they hatch, because just when you do, then we have, the inspection blows up or the appraisal blows up or people break up or somebody buys furniture, at a furniture store before closing. There's all kinds of crazy things that happen. So this protects your clients so that in the event that transaction on the home they own now does not occur, then they're not on the hook to buy the next one. And this one's a very, very simple form. Again, you just put in their property address here. And then you put right in here that what their settlement date is on their property that they're selling. And you provide a copy of the agreement of sale between their home as a seller and the buyers that they're selling it to. So you place that right in your offer, and then you have the parties sign. So it's a very, very simple form. It's not very complicated. This one usually gets accepted. If I had to guess, and I'm just speculating here, I would say that this gets accepted a good 80% of the time, if not better, because this is just basically telling the seller where the funds are coming from. I'm actually doing one on a property myself. I have a settlement of other property contingency on a property that I own that I'm selling. And I know that he has to close on that one first. I had no problems with that. I was able to verify that with him. So definitely a good form to use, just as an added layer of protection for your clients if they are selling a home and then they're moving into their next home. Any questions on the sale of other property contingency? No? Would anybody like me to review any of these forms again? No? Pretty good? Pretty good. All right, guys. Well, that's all I have for you today with your sale and settlement training. We will be back, I believe, I'm on vacation next week. So in 2 weeks, we'll be back to continue the contract training series. If you guys do have any questions or want to go over this in more detail on how to fill these out, what they mean, please reach out to me and let me know. I'd be happy to sit down with you when I'm in your designated office one day. Of course, like I always do, I will stay on the line until everybody is gone in case you have any questions that you did not want to share with the group. But if I don't see you for the rest of the day, have an amazing day. Thanks, guys.